Voting is closed in the Conservative Party leadership race in the UK. Either Boris Johnson or Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt will be named as the new British Prime Minister tomorrow.
So former London Mayor Johnson is a front-runner, but two ministers have now quit in protest and more is set to follow if he wins. Hunt has meanwhile announced an increased European presence in the Gulf following the Iranian seizure of a British tanker, which he called an act of state piracy.
Our correspondent Holly Hudson has more from London.
It's expected Boris Johnson will win the keys to number 10. He's the current runaway favourite to beat Jeremy Hunt and be picked by Conservative Party members to enter Downing Street. But it's by no means going to be a smooth transition if he is to become the next Prime Minister, mainly because of his plans for Brexit. They've sort of caused a rebel alliance of MPs to rise up, some of whom are even resigning. Margot James, the first one last week, she broke ranks in a vote in Parliament to stop him from forcing through no deal. She called him reckless. Sir Alan Duncan, the latest to go today, he has resigned in protest. And tomorrow, when the winner is announced, if it is Boris Johnson, then we're expected to see at least a dozen or so more quit their posts, including Rory Stewart, the current Chancellor Philip Hammond, and Justice Secretary David Gauke, who says he's not convinced that a deal will be agreed before the 31st of October, all the stages done, and it would lead to a national humiliation, as he calls it. The central promise of Boris Johnson's leadership campaign has been that by the 31st of October, do or die, we will leave the European Union with or without a deal. Now, he said he would like to negotiate a deal before then, hoping that the EU will sort of submit with the threat of no deal hanging over them. But his red lines have horrified some MPs, particularly with regards to the Northern Irish backstop. Certain measures that he said he wouldn't agree with that could potentially save Theresa May's deal, that's the only deal that the EU say is on the table at the moment. So Boris Johnson facing a very divided party between those that do want to agree a deal, do want to renegotiate, and those that want us to leave by the 31st of October. Some MPs really threatening to derail that plan, even defecting, potentially a vote of no confidence, but they're willing to give him until autumn at least to prove that he does have a plan. But that won't be the only problem Boris Johnson faces within just a few days of entering number 10. What with diplomatic tensions once again increasing with Iran following the seizure of the British-flagged tanker, the Stena Impero, on Friday in retaliation for Britain's capture of the Grace 1, the Iranian tanker which they suspected of breaking EU sanctions. The Prime Minister has chaired an emergency meeting with ministers and officials on that today, and the Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, Boris Johnson's rival in the leadership contest, has spoken of the steps that Britain is going to take against Iran in Parliament.
Iran had no right to obstruct the ship's passage, let alone board her. It was therefore an act of state piracy, which the House will have no hesitation in condemning. I can today update the House on further action we are taking. Firstly, the Department of Transport has raised the security level for British flag shipping to level 3, advising against all passage in Iranian waters and, for the moment, in the entire Strait of Hormuz. Secondly, because freedom of navigation is a vital interest of every nation, we will now seek to put together a European-led maritime protection mission to support safe passage of both crew and cargo in this vital region.
The government has been facing some fierce criticism over its response to this crisis and the protection of British ships through the Strait of Hormuz, with many questioning why they haven't allowed the US to shelter their ships through the Gulf. However, many say that would be a potential endorsement of US policy, which would anger Iran. And of course, Britain disagrees with the US over the Iranian nuclear deal. So this is going to be a tricky test for the new Prime Minister when they enter office, not least because Iran is signalling it's ready for a long standoff over this tanker seizure.